Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight in Guinea, the military junta that has been tightening its grip on power after ousting the country's president over the weekend. It's pledged to free all political prisoners imprisoned under Alpha Condé. Also, Tigrayan forces claim that dozens of people starved to death in the northern Ethiopian region last month because of a food aid blockade by federal authorities. Many of those who reportedly died were in camps for those displaced by conflict that began in Tigray last year. And we take a look at some of the 8 ancient mosques in Ivory Coast that have been recognized for their architectural and historical importance by being added to UNESCO's World Heritage List. The religious buildings are a testament to ancestral know-how and the importance of the 14th century trans-Saharan trade. But first, the military leader behind Mali's coup has said that he will release political detainees imprisoned by ousted President Alpha Condé. The 83-year-old, who was the country's first democratically elected president, had come under fire for growing increasingly authoritarian and triggered protests last year for forcing through a change to the constitution that allowed him to run for a third term. While the junta behind his overthrow over the weekend has already appointed army officers at the head of the country's provincial regions and said that it will form a new government. Regional bloc ECOWAS is due to meet Wednesday to discuss Guinea's crisis. Jenny Shin tells us more.
Following the coup over the weekend that ousted President Alpha Condé, Guinea's military leader Mamadi Doumbouya vowed to form a unity administration after dissolving the government.
We want the upcoming transition to be a sign of hope and of a new Guinea, reconciled with itself, with all the sons of the country.
The power grab has been welcomed by the country's leading opposition coalition, the FNDC, many of whose members and supporters were arrested under the previous administration. The military junta has since pledged to release all political detainees held under the ousted President Alpha Condé, who himself is currently being held in military detention.
The President of the National Council for Recovery and Development instructed the Ministry of Justice today to contact the Prosecutor General's office, the prison administration and the lawyers in order to conduct a thorough analysis of the political prisoners for their release as soon as possible.
The routine imprisonment and abuse of opposition figures and critics has been brewing resentment for years in the country. Many were killed during protests against Condé's changes to the constitution, which enabled his controversial third-term victory last year. West African leaders have meanwhile called for Condé's immediate release, threatening sanctions in response to the coup. The regional bloc ECOWAS is set to hold a virtual summit on Wednesday to discuss the crisis.
Ethiopian rebels say that at least 150 people starved to death in August in the northern region of Tigray because of food blockades by the government. Around 500,000 people in Tigray are facing famine ever since conflict broke out there last November. Addis Ababa has been insisting that aid is getting through and blamed Tigrayan forces for the humanitarian crisis. The World Food Programme's warned that the emergency is just escalating. Nicolas Chemin has more.
This footage of the conflict in Ethiopia's Tigray region was shot by the World Food Programme. Some of their warehouses were looted. The UN says that in Tigray, 5.2 million people, that's 90% of the region's population, urgently need humanitarian assistance. This includes 400,000 people who are facing famine conditions.
I couldn't sleep at night and think straight all day thinking about what to feed my kids. I still think about how to provide for my kids.
Families who had to abandon their homes because of the fighting describe horrendous situations.
The whole journey was in scorching sun, and we were so thirsty it was agonizing. We were forced to drink rainwater from the ground, but that also made us sick.
The Tigray forces have accused the government of blocking aid because it fears the food will be given to troops rather than to civilians. The UN says 100 trucks of aid should be entering Tigray each day if the needs of the population were to be met.
We don't have any food stocks at the moment to plan with or to distribute. Whatever we have is currently being distributed or has already been distributed. So what we're looking at going forward is a difficult situation for us to keep providing services for our communities here.
The conflict erupted last November between the National Ethiopian Army and the TPLF, which controls the Tigray region. The TPLF dominated Ethiopian politics for nearly 3 decades, but says it has been marginalized since Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed came to power in 2018. Since November, thousands have died and more than 2 million people have been forced to flee their homes.
Members of Uganda's main opposition party have accused prosecutors of launching a political witch hunt against 2 members who've been charged with 3 counts of murder in connection to a spate of unsolved killings. Prominent MP Mohamed Segirinya and Alan Sewanya deny the accusations. Villagers in the region of Masaka have been terrorized by machete-wielding gangs who police say have killed around 30, mainly elderly people in their homes over the last 2 months. Segirinya and Sewanya belong to the National Unity platform of pop star turned politician Bobby Wine, who challenged longtime President Yoweri Museveni in disputed elections in January. Ivory Coast has agreed to end the refugee status of tens of thousands of its nationals who fled to other countries to escape deadly post-electoral violence that broke out in 2010. About 51,000 are still being hosted elsewhere, mainly in Ghana, Liberia, Guinea, Mali, Mauritania and Togo. Now, the UN's High Commissioner for Refugees has backed the push for repatriation and says that things have improved and that Ivorians who left because of instability in their homeland no longer need international protection. So that will be withdrawn next year. Hanan Ferjani tells us more.
This cessation clause will put a stop to the prima facie refugee status that was so far granted to Ivorians, a status that would allow for them to be automatically granted refugee benefits without having to provide evidence of imminent danger in their home country. The signing of this clause is a rare event, according to the UNHCR. The institution sees it as proof of considerable improvement in peace and security conditions in Ivory Coast. It should be noted that since the post-electoral crisis of 2010-2011, nearly 270,000 people have voluntarily returned to Ivory Coast, bringing the number of refugees due to the crisis in the country in the last 20 years down to 51,000 in the region, mainly in neighboring Liberia and Ghana. According to the Deputy High Commissioner in charge of operations, this move does not mean that the UNHCR isn't fulfilling its mandate.
Notre objectif, c'est de s'assurer que
our aim is to make sure that we continue to provide protection to refugees and that we succeed in finding long-term solutions, because being a refugee should not be an eternal condition. It's very difficult to be outside your own country, so we have to do everything to make sure that people can go back. If they can't go back and they have to stay in the country they are in, let's try to make sure that we can clarify their status there.
Another goal is to ensure that those who intend to return to Ivory Coast are integrated into a society where national reconciliation has become instrumental to political discourse since the last presidential election. As for the timeline for the end of this refugee status, the UNHCR is planning on completing its individual assessments by the end of June 2022.
Hanan Ferjani there for us. Now, 8 Sudanese-style adobe mosques in Ivory Coast have recently been added to the list of UNESCO World Heritage Sites. The centuries-old buildings boast striking architecture that bear testimony to the trans-Saharan trade that was key to the spread of Islamic culture. Samuel Bernard sent us this report.
In the Grand Mosque of Kong, Friday's prayer are a weekly routine for the Muslim community. This 300-year-old construction is the largest of the 8 Sudanese-style mosques in Ivory Coast, which were recently added to UNESCO's World Heritage List. Locals are proud of the decision.
This will bring us a lot. It's a recognition not only for the mosques, but also for Kong as a town.
Kong has a second, smaller mosque in the same style that also joined UNESCO's list. Most of these constructions were built in the 17th century. Their history offers a bridge between Ivory Coast and its neighbors. To understand this context, one must look back to before its construction in the 14th century and to the Malian Emperor Mansa Musa, who brought back ideas for this architectural style after making a pilgrimage to Mecca.
L'empereur du Mali est revenu dans son pays
The Malian emperor came back to his country with an architect who designed the first archetype of the Sudanese style, which emerged from the 14th century in Mali and, in the 16th century, spread to the north of Ivory Coast.
For now, visitors are still rare. Only a few Ivorians, often those making a pilgrimage, come to visit.
It's a big thing, very important to me. Taking worship back to its roots is essential.
Despite the precarious security in this region of the country, the addition of these mosques to the prestigious UNESCO's heritage list could help encourage tourists to visit the north of Ivory Coast.
Beautiful. Well, that is, though, all we have time for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again if you can. Take care.
Residents from France's disadvantaged suburbs tell their own stories and take the viewers beyond the usual clichés about the French banlieue.
Moi, j'avais envie de dire, mais allez-y, pétez-les les cases. Moi, je viens de là, donc je m'arrête là. Moi, j'ai fait ci, donc je suis condamné à ça. Non!
Moi, ce que je vois, c'est des jeunes hommes et des jeunes femmes qui sont fiers de leur origine, fiers de leurs parents, et sont fiers d'être français.
Watch their daily reality in the Banlieue Project on France 24 and France24.com.
Reporters, exclusive insights, the stories that matter. Real people all around the world. France 24 international correspondents witness as it happens, where it happens, and they bring it to you.
Join me every week for a new edition of Reporters on France 24 and France24.com.
France 24, a different point of view.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.